To Fox News Alert, President Trump announcing the U.S. military has carried out strikes against ISIS terrorists in the northwest Nigerian region in response.
U.S. President Donald Trump said
A few days ago, something happened that most people probably didn't notice. Reports came out that the United States had carried out airstrikes against ISIS-affiliated fighters in Nigeria. There was no breaking news banner, no emergency summit, no sense that something historic had just happened. It was just another headline, and that's kind of the point, because if you've looked at the news over the past few months or even the past few years, Nigeria keeps appearing like this. Suddenly, briefly, and almost always in the context of violence. An attack here, a bombing there, a military operation, a kidnapping, a raid, and then silence again. So today I want to step back and ask a very simple question. What is actually happening in Nigeria, and why does the same story keep resurfacing? If you scroll back through international coverage, Nigeria doesn't appear as one long, continuous story. It appears in fragments. One week, it's an attack in the northeast. Another week, it's a warning from the US State Department. Then months later, another headline about ISIS, this time in West Africa. Each article feels disconnected, but they're not. They're all pieces of this. Nigeria is a country filled with landmarks and landscapes most people never see. Ancient city walls, carved rock formations, long stretches of coastline, and dense rainforests that fade into open savanna. Waterfalls hidden far from highways, rivers that cut through entire regions, and cities built on centuries of history. It's a place known far more for its beauty at home than for its head. Nigeria is Africa's most populous country, with over 200 million people and one of the largest economies on the continent. It's a country with hundreds of ethnic groups, dozens of languages, and an enormous amount of cultural and political influence. But when it shows up in global news, it's rarely for any of that. It shows up when something goes wrong. Over time, that's trained the rest of the world to see Nigeria not as a place, but as a problem. To understand why these problems keep resurfacing, you have to understand how Nigeria came to be in the first place. Modern Nigeria didn't emerge naturally over centuries. It was created during British colonial rule, when diverse regions, cultures, and political systems were merged into a single country for administrative convenience. When Nigeria gained independence in 1960, it inherited borders that didn't reflect shared history or identity, and a state that was still trying to figure out what it actually was. The decades that followed were marked by instability, military coups, authoritarian rule, and a brutal civil war in the late 1960s that left deep scars. Even after the return to civilian government, power, wealth, and opportunity remained unevenly distributed, especially between the south and the north of the country. Nigeria is rich in resources, particularly oil, but that wealth has never been evenly shared. Corruption, weak institutions, and rapid population growth created vast gaps between those who benefit from the system and those who feel completely abandoned by it. In many northern regions, the state's presence has been minimal for decades. Limited access to education, jobs, healthcare, or security. That absence matters, because where the state pulls back, something else eventually moves in. That's the environment where Boko Haram emerged in the early 2000s. At first, it wasn't a global threat or an international headline. It was a local movement rooted in anger, frustration, and a deep sense of exclusion. But as clashes with the government intensified, the group became more extreme and more violent. Over time, it fractured, and some factions pledged allegiance to ISIS. That moment changed everything, because the conflict stopped being seen as a domestic Nigerian crisis and became part of a global war on terror. When a group aligns itself with ISIS, it changes how the world responds. Suddenly, this isn't just an insurgency, it's a node in an international network. That's how you end up with ISIS affiliates operating not just in the Middle East, but across Africa, in places like Somalia, the Sahel, and Nigeria. And that's why the United States appears in this story at all. The US isn't involved in Nigeria because of Nigeria itself. It's involved because of what Nigeria represents in the fight against ISIS. From Washington's point of view, every ISIS affiliate is a potential foothold, a place where fighters can train, regroup, and expand. So when reports surface about US strikes against ISIS-linked targets in Nigeria, it's not a sign of a new war. It's a continuation of an old one, a war that never really ended. It just shifted locations. But if you focus only on airstrikes and militant groups, you miss what this actually looks like on the ground. For people living in northern Nigeria, this conflict isn't a headline. It's a constant. Entire villages have been emptied. Millions of people have been displaced. Farms abandoned. Markets closed. Families separated. Children grow up knowing checkpoints better than classrooms. And most of that never makes international news, because slow suffering doesn't trend. Only explosions do. Every few months, the same cycle repeats. A militant attack happens. The military responds. Foreign governments comment. And then attention fades. But nothing is actually resolved. Groups splinter instead of disappearing. New leaders replace old ones. Violence shifts locations instead of ending. So when Nigeria shows up in the news again, when ISIS is mentioned again, it feels sudden. But for the people living there, it never stopped. There's a tendency to think of conflicts like this as background noise, as something distant, complicated, and unfixable. But Nigeria sits at the center of West Africa. Instability there doesn't stay there. It affects migration, regional security, trade, and politics far beyond its borders. Which means these quiet headlines aren't just reminders of a local problem, they're warnings of something unresolved. The recent reports about US strikes in Nigeria aren't the beginning of a new story, they're a reminder of an old one. A story that never really ended, it just slipped in and out of the news cycle. And until the conditions that fuel this conflict change, Nigeria will keep appearing the same way, briefly, violently, and then quietly disappearing again. Not because nothing is happening, but because it's been happening for a very long time.